Welcome to Tabernacle Baptist Church. We appreciate you being here in God's house this morning in our Sunday school time. We've gotten down towards the end of the book of Ruth, a short book dealing with the kinsman redeemer. And if we go back and just take a look at some of the chapters here, we find that chapter number 1 is a chapter of defeat, basically a chapter of trials. There's no bread in Bethel, so they go down to Moab. And of course, if you hear some preacher preaching about this book, they'll say what a picture that they had leaving the house of bread where God could bless them, going down into Moab, the garbage can of the land, so to speak. And it was not a good thing. But we see here that even though they went through a lot of trials, there's a bright spot in this first chapter. We see Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion passing away, the father and the two sons. We find the mother telling the two daughter-in-laws, and Naomi says, go back to your people, go back to your gods. And one of them, Orpah, drops out of the pages of history because she goes back to her people. But then there's Ruth, and she makes this declaration. What a powerful declaration she makes in chapter number 1. Verse number 16, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. What a bright spot there, that she had gotten a hunger for a true relationship with the Lord. She says, I want your people to be my people. I know what I left home. Now that I've been in your family, I know what I've left home to leave behind. I know what you have. And think about this, even in their sorrow, even with the loss of the father and the two sons, Ruth could see that there was something more in what they had than what she had left behind. And she said, I can't go back. I've had a taste of what the blessings of the Lord are like. Now, can you imagine that? During a time that all this was going on, where the father and the two sons had passed away, and yet she is determined to stay by Naomi, and Naomi and Ruth go back to Bethel. And as they return to Bethel, she is greeted by those that said, Naomi, it's good to see you back. And Naomi said, don't call me Naomi, I'm not full anymore, I'm empty, call me Mara. God's taken everything away from me, I don't have anything. And of course, we mentioned the fact that Ruth is with her. And, she could have gotten bitter. You know how people get, don't you? When they get their feelings hurt, somebody says something, and it's not necessarily directed towards them, but they take offense in it. Naomi was dealing with loss there because of her husband and two sons. Everything that was security for her had been taken away. And all she had was this little Moabitess maiden that followed her back. And yet, as she deals with this doesn't change Ruth's attitude. She's already determined. She's already made her vow, so to speak, to Naomi. I will not leave you. I want what you have. I want what your people has. I want what your God can give me. I want to be where I can be with you, and the only thing that's going to separate us is death. Chapter number 2. We find a first mention, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Now this is important. This sets up everything else. Where she was empty, at least she felt that way. There was the hand of God working in her coming back to Bethel that would be of great joy. We've already covered it in chapters. But as Ruth goes out, she says, I'm going to glean in the fields. And it says, verse number 3, that, and her hap was to light on the part of the field belonging unto Boaz. Was it happenstance? Oh no, it was the hand of God. Why do you think he said her hap was? Well, from her vantage point, she was just going from field to field. And she went from one field to another field and another field, and then she comes to Boaz's field. Now, what made the field of Boaz so different was as she was gleaning, Boaz came and blessed the workers and told them, God bless you, and they responded, and God bless you too, and he noticed Ruth. Was that by happenstance as well? No, that was the hand of God. We see God leading in this area. And as he watches her, he calls her. And he says, after he finds out who she is, she said, don't leave my field. I'll take care of you. I've told my young men in the field to protect you, to watch over you. They'll keep others from bothering you. I've told the young ladies of the field to let you come and you just glean with the young ladies of the field that I have on my staff that are working for me. And you eat, you drink the water. And then she responds with, as she falls on her face and says unto him, why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing how I am a stranger? She said, you know, I'm Moabitess. I'm not from around here. I'm not one of your family. And he said, oh, I've heard about you. I've heard about your testimony, and I've heard about your care for my kinfolk Naomi. And by the way, since you're here, just stay for dinner. You come to the table and you eat with us. And she goes home and she tells Naomi all the things that have happened to her. And Naomi says, this is the hand of the Lord. And you see, by the time that we get to chapter number 3, oh, by the way, I didn't mention one of the most significant things. Boaz tells the workers, now, if Ruth gets behind you, you drop a handful of purpose. Now, we talk about sometimes saying that it might be a handful on purpose, and it was on purpose, but it was a handful of purpose that was dropped by. And so as Ruth comes home and tells Naomi all these things, Naomi starts to see God working. Naomi sees the hand of the Lord in all this. And she says, my daughter-in-law, there's something you need to do. And she coaches her about meeting with Boaz, taking time after he's asleep, and she knows that he'll be working, threshing the grain. That says after everyone's still, after everyone's asleep, go up to Boaz and tuck yourself under the hem of his garment. And when he wakes up, say, I want to be under your care. I want to have you redeem me. I want to be under your watch care. Of course, we see there that Boaz does wake up, and after she says what she says, he compliments her, said, you're such a mature young lady, and here you could have gone after anybody, but you've asked me to redeem you, and I will gladly do it. But he says, there is a kinsman redeemer that's closer than I am. And if he will redeem you, that is good. But if he doesn't, I will. In fact, he was saying, as long as you're taken care of, that's what I'm looking for. But I imagine Boaz knew a little bit about this near kinsman redeemer just because of the way that he deals with him in chapter number 3 and going on in chapter number 4. But anyway, the one thing he tells her, he says, now don't tell anyone about this, because I want to, first of all, I don't want word to get around to the near kinsman redeemer. I want to meet with him this morning. I'll take care of everything. Don't worry about anything. Your redemption is my job. What a beautiful picture of salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ. And we come to the Lord and say, what can I do? Is there anything good that I can do? Is there any work that I can do? What can I do to gain salvation? And he says, I have done it all for you. The redemption that is offered to you is offered as a gift. And as there was nothing that Ruth could do but wait, then there's nothing that we can do outside of receiving Christ as Savior. And aren't you glad that he died on the cross and rose again to give us that everlasting life? We go down to the end of chapter number 3, and we find that he says, take your veil, Ruth. I'm going to fill it with grain. Take it to your mother-in-law, Naomi. His care was not just for Ruth. His care was for Ruth and Naomi. And I don't know, maybe Boaz had an idea that Naomi might have been behind this, giving the instructions about what to do. Can you imagine that? That Boaz, as he's dealing with her, dealing with Ruth, and his mind goes, says, now Naomi knows all about the kinsman redeemer. She's grown up knowing about this. I wouldn't be surprised if that 6 measures of barley that was placed in her veil and sent to her mother-in-law was a thank you. Thank you. Thank you for telling Ruth. I wanted to have the opportunity, but I won't do anything unless I'm asked. He was not going to force himself on Ruth. Evidently, Ruth was a beautiful young lady as Boaz's attention was drawn to her. But he would not force himself on her. It's just like salvation, isn't it? God doesn't force us to be saved. Jesus doesn't force us to be saved. He draws us. Boaz drew her into his field, didn't he? Boaz said, I'll take care of you. The promises of God. But redemption had to be through Boaz and Boaz alone. Chapter number 4. Boaz comes to the gate, and he sees the near kinsman and tells him, come here, I need to talk to you. Gathers 10 men of the city and said, I need you to witness this. And he speaks about redeeming the land that Naomi had, and this near kinsman said, oh yeah, I'll be glad to do that. Man, I could use that land. I could use that land. And he says, no, wait a minute. If you redeem the land, you also have to redeem Ruth and Naomi as well. And Ruth has not had any children. So there needs to be some children raised in the name of Mahlon. And Chilion is mentioned here too, but in the name of Elimelech, in the name of Mahlon. And if you redeem this property, you have to redeem Ruth so that the children she has can be a testimonial and a stand-in for Mahlon and Chilion, who died before they could be daddies. And this is where, and I believe that as the nearer kinsman, I think we mentioned this, and I would think that the nearer kinsman could have redeemed Ruth, even though he said he couldn't. I think the problem was, and he gives a hint to this when he said, I will mar my own inheritance. I can't raise children in the name of Mahlon and Chilion. I'm not going to raise children in the name of Elimelech. I want my children in my house to be those that will bear my name and be in my lineage. I'm not going to be bearing children and fathering children for someone who's dead and gone on. Now, notice the difference between Boaz, who was willing to help others, and this nearer kinsman who was only looking out for himself. Verse number 6 says, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner of the former time in Israel concerning the redeeming and concerning changing to confirm all things. A man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Now you know that he meant business if he was going to go home with one shoe off and one shoe on. You knew that if he said, okay, I'm giving you permission, then Boaz said, all right, let's see the shoe. You're gonna tell me that you're gonna make this my responsibility? You're gonna hand it over to me? You got 10 men watching, take off your shoe and give it to me. And of course, that's exactly what the man did. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day. Now I can imagine there was a crowd around there now, don't you? The 10 men had stopped, but others had stopped to see what was going on. And as he talked to the 10 witnesses, he talked to everyone that was there. And probably there were those that say, hey, that's Boaz in the gate. What's he doing? I don't know, but some guy just took his shoes off. There must be some type of transaction going on. Let's go over there and listen to that. And Boaz was able to tell the elders and all the people that were there, ye are witnesses this day, that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's at the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon the inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among the brethren, and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. There was an excitement he had. Yeah, but none of this was for himself. All of this was for others. He was dealing with a love for his family. But in doing so, he was also receiving the love of his life, Ruth. And he knew that by doing that for others that needed to be done, he would be benefiting himself. And I want you to see this, because even though there were children that were raised in the name and the stead of Mahlon, and of course Elimelech, that there would be something would be given to us at the very end of the chapter. Verse number 11, all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. Can you imagine that crowd? Maybe some of the men going home, guess what I was able to witness today? Boaz bought all of Elimelech's, redeemed Elimelech's property, and Naomi and that little Moabite maiden, Ruth. And maybe the family said, isn't that sweet? Said, I've heard a lot about Ruth. I've heard a lot about her. But listen to what it says here. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine hand like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception. She bare a son. And the woman said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. Now remember, what Boaz is doing for Naomi and Ruth by redeeming them is for the benefit of Naomi and Elimelech and Mahlon in the name. But you'll notice here that Boaz was the one who became the one that was the one that was remembered, the kinsman redeemer, because he got the bride out of it. And even though Jesus Christ died for others, Jesus Christ will also receive a bride from what he does for others. The church will be his bride one day. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when they went in, he went in unto her, he gave her conception, bare a son. So there's already fruit from this union here between Boaz and Ruth. And the women talked to Naomi, and notice the difference between the end of chapter 4 and the end of chapter 1. What made the difference? What made the difference for Naomi? It wasn't just the fact that she was redeemed in chapter number 4. It was the fact that she was seeing the hand of God in chapter number 2 and chapter number 3. She was seeing what the Lord was doing. She was seeing the hand of the Lord even before she was redeemed. And I can imagine as they were waiting, and it indicates here that there was nothing to do. And Naomi told Ruth, you have to wait. You have to wait. There's nothing else you can do. Redemption is not from you. Redemption is from Boaz. But when that redemption came, when they were joined in marriage, and I go back to verse number 11 and 12. Can you imagine how much Boaz was admired because of his godly life? Those that worked for him in the field, when he'd come in and give the blessing of the Lord, they'd bless him back. There was a communication there. There was a camaraderie there. There was a fellowship there. But notice here, this crowd that had come to witness this, that stopped by and said, we need to see what's going on. There were the 10 that were officially there, but the crowd that was gathered around them, and they're all saying, let the Lord bless you, Boaz. The Lord bless you in what you do. The Lord grant you to have a full house, and just like Leah and Rachel, who gave all that they had as far as building the tribes of Judah, the tribes of Israel. And he's mentioned also Pharez and Tamar and Judah, and how his lineage had come through there, and just like that lineage had brought all the way down to you, Boaz, may you find the blessings. And this was the crowd, according to what we have in the Bible, and they were all blessing him and asking for God's blessing and encouraging him through this. Boaz was a godly man. Now, let's read on just a little bit. Verse number 15 says, and he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child, and laid it in her bosom, and behold, and became a nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. Now, we're going to take a look at Obed, and we're going to take a look at some of the things here, but at the end of this chapter, as we're wrapping everything up, and we're talking about the Redeemer, and it's interesting that at Christmas time, when we remember the giving of the Redeemer, our kinsman Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ, when he stepped on the scene to become our kinsman Redeemer, he stepped in the field of the world in order to bring the blessings to those all around him and to bring redemption to those who needed it. This is what we find here, as we find that this baby being called Obed, he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So you see here, as Boaz is dealing in the kindness of others, God uses this account of the kinsman redeemer to bring us to a place where we see that God is using this in the lineage. And just as the blessings had been given, oh my, not only was there going to be a special blessing given because of what he had done in redeeming Ruth and this baby being born, and there was a blessing there, and that baby Obed would be raised in the name of Mahlon, who died, Ruth's husband who died, but also the fact that this little fellow named Obed would have a boy later on whose name was Jesse. And Jesse would have several sons, and one of them would be, well, he'd be the little fellow of the bunch. And he wouldn't look like a king like his oldest brother, Eliab. But this little fellow named David would become the king of Israel. Now, I wanted to stop here because it does go on to talk about, starting with the generations of Phares. And we've had him mentioned earlier, the son of Judah. Now, Phares has an interesting lineage because we see that these are the generations of Phares. Phares begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram, and Ram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon. Now, this is an interesting name here because Salmon has an interesting position earlier in the Bible that we can find out in the book of Matthew, chapter number 1, verse number 5. So I want to share this with you because we're talking about the fireplace, and someone, I don't remember, seemed like it might have been T.A. Lester, maybe Brother Bain possibly, that preached one time about the shoe over the fireplace. Didn't have a sword, crossed, or rifle, or some sort of armament, but it had a shoe over there. And every time Boaz and Ruth would come in, and Obed and a little fella come in and says, "What's that, Daddy?" And said, "That's the shoe. That's a shoe that was given me so that I could buy your mama back. And so I could be your daddy." Obed said, "I like that shoe." But you know, there may have been something else. If there was a fireplace, and we're assuming that that might be the case, what an interesting fireplace that would be. But I'd like for you to turn to the book of Matthew, please, in chapter number 1. In Matthew chapter number 1, I want to read this to you. Verse number 1 says, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now this is the legal lineage, okay? You understand that Joseph was not the father of Jesus, but Joseph would become the guardian of Jesus, the stepfather of Jesus. And so even though the lineage in Luke deals with the lineage of Mary and her lineage through David, someone might say, but yeah, Joseph is the legal guardian. I bet his lineage isn't through David, so we can't say that this is the one that comes, the Messiah that will sit on the throne of his father David. But we'll find even in the legal sense, but I want to read this as we're dealing with this. This is the generations of Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, the one who would be his guardian. But notice verse number 5, and Salmon begat Boaz, or Boaz, that's the New Testament serving, of Rachab. Who's Rachab? Well, that's a New Testament spelling. The Old Testament spelling is Rahab. Boaz's daddy was one of the spies that went in to Jericho. And Boaz's mama was living in the wall, and her name was Rahab. And Rahab believed God and asked those men who she was hiding in her place in the wall, will you promise me that when you come, that the Lord will watch after me? Will you keep me safe? And they said, of course, she let them down by a red cord that evidently had been taken from her garments as a prostitute. And now the harlot, now the only red that she had to her possession was the red that was dangling from the window, because one of the spies says, leave that cord there, and if you leave that cord there, we can guarantee your safety because God will protect you. Remember when Jericho fell, the walls fell flat except for that part of the tower. I mean, it was part of the wall, but it became a tower to the grace of God, where Rahab and all of her family that she could stuff in there. And they were all saved.